Hello and welcome to coverage for Skirmish 22 for the MSEM format. So what is MSEM? MSEM stands for Magic Set Editor Modern, and it's an entirely custom format, non-rotating. Its power level is intended to be slightly below that of regular Modern. It's a turn 4 format rather than turn 3. Skirmishes are our weekly tournaments, which are single elimination. They're played as Swiss rounds, and there are 3 to 4 Swiss rounds, and at the end, the person who is 3-0 or 4-0 ends up winning the event. These are closed deck lists, unlike our monthly tournaments, and so people usually use these to test off the wall brews, or basically just gather more data before they bring decks to our monthly tournaments. That being said, let's get into it. The match we're going to be watching today is a round 1 match between Kevin and Edward. So I'm not sure what decks these people could be playing. Kevin did just bring Teamer Tempo to the most recent Grand Prix, but has played a bunch of different decks before. Edward, on the other hand, has pretty solidly only played MonoBlack Villainy featuring Warden. So what does that mean? So Villainy is an enchantment for black that says whenever a creature dies for the first time each turn, you lose 1 life and draw a card. And whenever you cast a black non-creature spell, deal 2 damage to any target and you gain 2 life. It's a powerful win con for black control decks. Edward's spin on it uses a card called Warden. Essentially, it's a 4/4 for 2 black, and when it dies, you make 3 copies of it and shuffle them into your deck, and it cantrips on ETB. Oh, also importantly, is that when the dice trigger also makes all of your subsequent wardens free. So it essentially gives Edward a more mid-rangey plan, and it's a strong main deck answer to opposing control decks. Anyways, so Edward is going to be starting off with turn 1, Swamp, Stolen Secrets. Stolen Secrets is our premier hand attack spell. You choose an online card type, and you get to grab a card of that type from that opponent's hand. It rewards format knowledge. However, just naming creatures is usually good enough to get most decks, which is what Edward's doing here. So looking at this hand, okay, so there's 4 Angel Touch lands, a Holy War, and a Sevid. So this looks like it would be 5-color Angel Touch tokens. Unfortunately, there's no creatures in there, so Stolen Secrets whiffs. So what is 5-color Angel Touch tokens? It's essentially a kind of aggressive mid-range deck that plays a bunch of multicolored cards that create tokens, aims to create a big board, and then just overwhelm your opponent. It uses cards like Nomadic Patriarch and Saigura Tam to basically buff up your entire board. So, and how does it reasonably do 5-color? Well, it uses the Angel Touch lands, which essentially they're tricolor lands which enter untapped, but you can only use them to cast multicolored spells. Meanwhile, Edward is tapping out for Chigao. It basically says when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, then you choose a creature card name, and you can cast that creature from your graveyard. So in Edward's deck, you use this to name Warden, and then when Warden dies, you can infinitely cast it from your graveyard to keep cantripping, especially with a sack outlet. Kevin's just going to play another land and pass. As we saw, unless he's some variants of this deck do run counter magic, like Invalidate, but I think it's just that Kevin doesn't have a play until turn 3. A Stolen Secrets naming Planeswalker will be able to take out Sevid. We see that Kevin has drawn another land and then Blood Frenzy. Blood Frenzy not really useful in this matchup, because Edward can just not play creatures, and then Kevin can't get Blood Frenzy into his grave in order to use its Kindle mode to create tokens. Edward going to cast a Dark Bargain. A Dark Bargain is basically an enchantment Night Whisper that you can pay over turns. It's just a permanent based cantrip essentially. So unless Kevin top decked something, Kevin will not have a play this turn. Oh, tapping 3. So I guess Kevin did top deck something. Siguratam or Sevid? Or Rain's Eye. Rain's Eye. Okay. So this is really really good versus Edward's deck, because unless Edward has updated it, it's very weak to walkers. In order to deal with walkers, Edward needs Villainy plus spells to cast with it. And if Edward taps out for Villainy this turn, then Rain's Eye will just use his -2 in order to O-ring the Villainy. So Edward is kind of in a bind here. Like, Edward's other answer to walkers is just have creatures, but that doesn't really help once Rain's Eye hits the board. Also, having to crack that Dark Bargain in order to find a land drop kind of sucks. And Edward is just going to pass. I'm not sure what Edward could have here. Maybe a Strike from the Shadows at instant speed, but that's not really where Edward wants to be. Despite being a control deck, as far as I remember, most of Edward's stuff is at sorcery speed. So Kevin can tap out for Holy War this turn. I guess it's going to do that main 2. Kevin did mill a Sevid, and Sevid did get discarded by Stolen Secrets. So main 2, Kevin could sack the Spirit Snake and then bring back Sevid, cast it. But I think for now, Kevin is going to keep the snake around. Oh no, Kevin is going to 0 and retrieve Sevid. And then probably cast Sevid. Having 2 walkers resolved versus Villainy is really scary. And then, so Sevid just creates a token here. So Sevid is just going to say casting Sevid. Sevid is just going to +1 here, create a scout, and then this puts Edward in a really precarious position. So Edward is tapping 4, presumably for Warden. Yeah, so Warden of the Dead. In response, Edward is going to, and see, this is the interaction I was talking about. Invalidate is a cheap tempo counterspell. So just stopping Warden cold there. And even if Kevin didn't have Invalidate, Rain's Eye could exile it. And Kevin does have other removal spells like Crystal Wave. So next turn, Edward would have been able to cast the Warden from his graveyard with Chigao, but Kevin is going to preempt that by using Rain's Eye's O-Ring mode. Then just +1 Sevid to create a scout, and then probably tapping out for Holy War. So now, though this is a bit muddled, what happens is Kevin is just going to swing with 1 scout, gains 1 life, and then next turn can swing for 5. Yeah, I don't know that Edward's deck has any outs to this, really, because there's 1 wipe, No Regrets, which essentially functions as a tragic arrogance. It's each player chooses 1 non-land permanent they control and sacrifices the rest for 3 black. I think that's Edward's only real hope here. but I don't think like the last few iterations of this deck that Edward has played didn't have that card, so it's doubtful whether Edward has it. And like while a wipe like Wicked Weaving would be okay to kill the creature tokens here, it would be bad against the walkers. So Edward does have Villainy though. It's going to be tapping out for that. Has 2 more black mana up, so it's presumably going to shoot Rain's Eye. Yeah, plays Memento Mori, exiling, or is he going to make Kevin just sack a token? Thinking about it. So Memento Mori with the Edict mode. So Kevin has to sack a creature, then uses the Villainy trigger to kill Rain's Eye, bringing back Chigao. So if like Edward untaps next turn and has 3 black spells to shoot at 7, one of which is a wipe, then that stabilizes for Edward. Otherwise, this is still a bad position. So before Kevin takes his turn, one correction that's being made from last turn is that Edward didn't draw from the Villainy trigger, and Edward also didn't draw from Chigao and rename with Chigao. So Edward just drew 2, lost 1 life, and renamed Warden of the Dead with Chigao. So Kevin is checking a ruling to see if Edward is dead. I think this might be Nomadic Patriarch into Blood Frenzy. This is a line where, so Nomadic Patriarch, essentially, whenever a creature attacks or blocks, it gets +X until end of turn, where X is Nomadic Patriarch's power. What you can do is you can attack, and in response, you can Blood Frenzy your own Nomadic Patriarch to essentially give it +3, -3. It'll kill the Nomadic Patriarch, but because of how triggers work, the last known power will have been 5. So all these tokens get +5/+5. Kevin swings out for 24. Edward is tapped out, and Edward dies. Okay, so we're jumping into game 2. Kevin being on the draw makes it much harder for him to do the explosive starts this deck is capable of. But it's still possible. Meanwhile, the onus is on Edward to essentially have the wipes for Kevin's deck, and also have answers for the walkers. So probably brought in like a Sorcerer Spyglass from the side, and then just some more wipes, and Lost Memories as Walker Hate, along with Just Business. So starting with a turn 1 Duress, revealing Saigura Tam, Denuri Charm, and a Bahum's Penance. I think taking the Saigura Tam is the right call here. So Edward does take the Saigura Tam. That leaves Kevin with Denuri Charm as a turn 2 play, but presumably 2 1/1 tokens. That leaves Kevin with Denuri Charm as a turn 2 play, but presumably 2 1/1 tokens are more answerable than Saigura's incredibly fast damage. And, being a walker. So Edward's just going to play Shadowed Slums and pass. The only instant speed interaction Edward could have here potentially is Exit or Just Business, neither of which really do anything good versus Kevin on 2. I think really what Edward wanted was another piece of hand attack or a Dark Bargain right there. So Kevin is just going to play a land and pass, because Denuri Charm is an instant speed, so it preempts Edward like playing a land, it preempted Edward playing a land and going Wicked Weaving there, just to kill the 2 tokens, but instead Edward is going to tap out for a turn 3 Villainy. This is really strong, and on end, Ooh, Stall Fate. Really interesting tech from Kevin. So it basically functions as a counterspell / tempo piece. And Kevin just playing another land and then passing. I think out of the sideboard, it looks like Kevin got like a lot more like tempo-y with lots more instant speed cards like Denuri Charm and the Stall Fate. So Edward is going to try and go for Villainy again. This time Kevin lets it resolve. On end, Kevin plays Denuri Charm. Yep, here comes Denuri Charm. But really what Kevin needs here are like walkers, or needs like a guiding light to be able to kill this Villainy. Just playing the equivalent of Raise the Alarms isn't really going to do much. Because next turn, Edward can just untap, Dark Bargain, shoot both of your soldiers. So, but Kevin's just going to swing out for 2. I don't think Edward minds much, because Edward can quickly recoup the life loss with Villainy. That's 1 Villainy trigger's worth of damage. Main 2, tapping 3 for Rain's Eye. Really strong here. If Edward has Just Business, though, that'll be really good. Like, Just Business in response to this O-Ring. But no, Edward doesn't have it. So Rain's Eye gets to steal Villainy. So now Edward is reasonably on the back foot. Could have Lost Memories here and then kill Rain's Eye and get back Villainy. Duress instead. That tells me that Edward doesn't have a way to get rid of Rain's Eye, because if Edward had a way to get rid of Rain's Eye, Edward would do that first and then Duress so that Edward could get the Villainy trigger. So revealing Blood Frenzy, land, and Bahoom's Penance, and taking Bahoom's Penance. I guess when you're a control deck, you don't want your opponent to have ways to draw God knows how many cards. And Blood Frenzy does stuff from the grave anyways. And then Edward just passing with 3 cards in hand. That's really surprising. I don't know what Edward could be holding up here. So anyways, Kevin's going to play a land. We know that Kevin has a Blood Frenzy, but what did Kevin top deck here? Because I don't think Kevin could just Blood Frenzy something, like one of his own creatures. Okay, so Rain's Eye does Rain's Eye +1, milling 2 Angel Touch Caverns. You generally want to hit the gas off of that so that next turn you can sacrifice the snake and then bring back something. Though it's okay because Siguratam was taken out with hand attack, so Kevin can just bring it back. And Kevin just passing presumably drew a land or something. On end step, Edward is going to activate Shadowed Slums, reveals Memento Mori, and makes Kevin lose 1 life. Which, you know, Kevin being at 22 life, not exactly threatening. Also shows Edward's hand in that now that Kevin knows that Edward has Memento Mori as Gravehade, Kevin probably won't use Rain's Eye 0, because in response to Rain's Eye 0, Edward can just Memento Mori. And Edward just passing again. I really wish I knew what Edward had in hand other than the Memento Mori. Could Edward just be getting like super flooded? But Kevin could just run away with this game right now. Just keep +1ing Rain's Eye. And then next turn, Rain's Eye will be out of Lost Memories range. So Edward will need to have a just business. So creates another spirit token with drain, but mills 2 lands in the process. This is good for Kevin in this situation, because getting lands off the top of his deck is fine in an attempt to hit more gas, because Kevin's already at 5 lands, and Kevin's grave is no longer a valuable resource because of Memento Mori. And Edward just keeps drawing and passing. Main 1, finally. Okay, tapping out for another Villainy? No, Performer of Ambition. Okay. And nowhere close to flipping, really. And we know that on end, Kevin can just Blood Frenzy this. That's what happens. On end, Kevin just Blood Frenzies the Performer. And if at any point, like, if Kevin draws into Nomadic Patriarch here, Edward just dies. So Kevin creates another snake, mills Invalidate and Blood Frenzy. Blood Frenzy is a good mill. Now Kevin can essentially exile both Blood Frenzies, create 6 tokens, and present lethal next turn. Though really, that's overkill. I guess Kevin really only needs to exile 1. But instead, Kevin's tapping 3 Siguratam? No, okay, Sevid. And Sevid is 1 land off being able to create 2 creatures. That's pretty fine, I think. Just going to create a scout. Oh no, it's going to -1. Interesting. Grabbing a Coldgrave. I guess Kevin cited in Coldgrave for Wardens. Kevin is going to Blood Frenzy though, right? Okay, swing out for 4. Because if Kevin cracks Blood Frenzy, that's lethal next turn. Oh my god. And Edward has the Antithesis. So that wipes Kevin's entire board. And now Kevin can't Blood Frenzy because Antithesis sticks around until end step. So Edward, in 1 fell swoop, managed to stabilize there. But just goes to end again. I guess we know Edward has Memento Mori and then 2 other cards, but I'm wondering what else Edward could have in hand. Because didn't play a land. Maybe another Antithesis? But I think if Edward had an Antithesis, playing it when all Kevin could have as interaction is the 2 mana bounce spell or invalidate and not Crystal Wave is really important, because if Edward has another Antithesis, Edward could cast it non-miraged and then just basically win on the spot. Meanwhile, Kevin is going to -1 Sevid again, draw to Denuri Charm, and then just going to Rain's Eye. Milling Denuri, 2 Denuri. Did Kevin have 3 Denuri Charms in a row on top of his library? That's insane. Well, I guess next turn the play is crack the snake, bring back Siguratam, and then Kevin is really solidly ahead again. So on main 2, gonna Blood Frenzy. Yep. Now the question is Kevin gonna double Blood Frenzy here? Because then if Edward has another wipe, that might be going a little bit too all in. And Blood Frenzy plus Snake does kill with Nomadic Patriarch next turn. if Kevin draws it. Oh, does Edward finally have a play? Edward's going to main 1, tapping 2 for Chigao? No, Sorcerer's Spyglass. The Walker hate. Naming Rain's Eye properly. Also, we get to see what's in Kevin's hand. Crystal Wave, yep. Flush with Archer, interesting. Blood Frenzy and Denuri Charm. I'm surprised, honestly, that Kevin didn't just Crystal Wave this Sorcerer's Spyglass right now. And I guess this Flush with Archer, the point of it is to prevent quote-unquote storming off turn with Villainy. It does seem really weak because I feel like you want to be the aggressor in this matchup. Ooh, and then Edward dropping Flesh to Rot. So that kills Kevin's board, prevents Kevin from doing much. Okay, but Kevin is going to counter that. So on his upkeep, Kevin's High Prairies finally dies because it has Vanishing 4. That's the downside of being an untapped 5-color land. Meanwhile, Kevin is going to tap out 4 for Conjure Realities. So essentially, it's a tutor for a creature, instant, or sorcery, and then you abound. And abound basically means you cast a spell which costs less than they cost less than Conjure Realities from your hand. So this is really good because it allows Kevin to search for Nomadic Patriarch, cast Nomadic Patriarch. Edward is tapped out, and then Kevin just swings for 12 and wins on the spot. And that's game. So good games to Edward and Kevin. And Kevin takes it 2-0 on 5-colored tokens over Edward on MonoBlack Warden Villainy. Good luck to them in the rest of the skirmish. For now, this is Caillou signing off.